So you think this idea is really, really big. So now we do a pivot. And that's also what kills a lot of companies.
Well, if you pivot to the wrong thing, yes, Slack is a famous pivot from an online game to actually realizing that, oh, the communication tool that we use while we're developing this shitty game that nobody wants to play, let's pivot to that.
But you can't do it every 2 weeks.
No, you should not pivot every 2 weeks. You need to have a strong signal on like, oh, actually over here, there's a really strong opportunity. As a general rule, I would be super skeptical about a spin out when you're a really small startup and even when you're a mid-sized startup. But a pivot, you should always have your eyes open to like, what's the signal I have on my current thing I'm doing? Like, how well is that doing versus another thing that might be going better on the side? You should always be aware of that.
Hey everyone, this is Heini and Zachariassen here, and welcome to Founders Weekly, where we tell startup stories you can learn from. Today's episode is a fascinating one for all founders out there. We're diving into the dilemma many founders face, having too many great ideas, but needing to decide which one to focus on. That's where the concept of spin-outs comes in. When a business idea is so strong, it deserves its own company. But when should you actually spin out to a new company? And what should be in place before making that leap? That's what we're going to explore today. And we have a guest on who's tried the entire journey. My co-host today is Theis, Vivino co-founder and a friend. Welcome, Theis.
Thank you, Heine. Good to be here.
Great to have you. I mean, Theis, when we talk about our startup journey, I think sometimes it feels like we've spent a lot of our time killing ideas that usually one of us thought was amazing and the other one maybe not so much. What do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure. We've killed a lot of ideas. I think we've been really good at focusing on the main thing, but it has definitely meant that a lot of potentially good ideas have been cast aside, coming from the two of us, but also from the team or from the community, or just business opportunities. The phone ringing one day with someone who wants to partner on something exciting. And where it's tempting, but where most of the times we've been good at focusing. But like you say, today's topic, it's not always the right thing to say no. Sometimes there is this opportunity of actually creating an adjacent business. It's tough, but it's doable.
Yeah, totally. And I think when people come to you and say, hey, I have this great idea, I mean, let's put that out there right now. We do not value ideas very much. I mean, there is usually an overflow of ideas and just lack of execution, right? That's usually the problem, not the other way around.
Yeah, for sure. And when people have come to us and says, why don't you do this? Typically, the answer has been, well, because we haven't gotten to it yet. We just have a mountain of work in front of us on the core thing that we're doing. And it's not that we think it's a bad idea, but we simply don't have the bandwidth, and it's not the right timing to attack whatever, great idea you have, whether it's, Vivino for pet food or if it's a beer app or whatever we've had floating around.
And honestly, usually, Theis, not that I want to, celebrate our intellect that much, but usually we've had that idea already. I mean, it might be obvious you should be doing this, and why haven't you done it yet? Well, we did talk about it. We did decide to prioritize in a different way. But anyway, the thing we're going to talk about today is, when is there a really big idea that you don't want to do, but it's still so big that you want it to go into a separate company? And there is a fine balance every founder has to maintain between innovation and focus. According to a study by Harvard Business Review, 95% of product innovations fail, largely because startups themselves spread themselves too thin and fail to focus on core ideas. And they often feel sort of compelled to chase every single opportunity, but that can be detrimental. And this is something I do recognize. I've seen a lot of these startups that just go with something for a short period and then switch again. That is a huge problem, and a lot of fail on that, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you and I have done it as well. We managed to kind of pull the plug before it got out of hand. But remember, back in the day when Samsung called us with their new fancy smartwatch, and they were like, this is going to be the new form factor. Forget about the smartphones. Everybody's going to be wearing these James Bond watches, and they're going to have cameras. So Vivino is going to be great on this thing. And they offered to sponsor the development of Vivino for this smartwatch. This was back in the day. This was before the Apple Watch, and
13, 14, I think, right?
Yeah, and so we were tempted by this, right? And we said, yeah, okay, sure. And we set up even a small team to develop this version and so on. And ultimately, it ended up being a huge waste of time. It never went anywhere. Not that smartwatches didn't go anywhere, but the like basic idea of, oh, you could take what is today an app on your phone and it'll do the same thing on a watch. It was just completely misguided. But we were tempted by this, right? Here's this huge global company that contacts us and says, hey, we'll pay for your development and so on. And it's easy to make these calculations of like, oh, if they're going to pay for it, then why not do it? Well, it's going to massively defocus you, right? And that's also what happened for us, right? You and I, we spent bandwidth in our heads on this sub project that was just ended up being a massive distraction. So it's tempting to pick up the phone when someone big calls.
And this is the other thing on those ideas is that it is something to do with ego too. I actually specifically remember, Theis, you and I sitting at a cafe not far from the office and sort of looking each other in the eye and saying, holy crap, we're onto something here. Samsung just called, right? And we thought that was wild. And it is, right?
It was, and it was a validation of where we were, right? The Samsung had looked in the market and be like, who's the wine app, right? Who are the people that can do this for wine on this phone? And they picked us, right? Yeah. And they had looked at many verticals and like, no, this is what we're going to go for. I think they picked like 10 software partners across the globe, and we were one of them. So yeah, we felt validated and like, yeah, fuck yeah, we're going to do this.
The alternative to a spin it is sort of a pivot, right? So you think this idea is really, really big. So now we do a pivot. And that's also what kills a lot of companies, right? Because they end up doing a pivot instead of just staying in the lane. Then you keep doing pivots and then you die.
Well, if you pivot to the wrong thing, yes. But I also think, you also have a lot of examples of where a pivot actually saves a company or makes it into something much, much bigger, right? You have, Slack is a famous pivot from an online game to actually realizing that, oh, the communication tool that we use while we're developing this shitty game that nobody wants to play, that communication tool is actually really great. Let's pivot to that. Like you have a lot of examples where pivots work. And yes, to what you're saying.
But you can't do it every 2 weeks.
No, you should not pivot every 2 weeks. You need to have a strong signal on like, oh, actually over here, there's a really strong opportunity. But I think the idea of a spin out when you are a really small startup is probably always false. Like it would be very rare that you actually, because you think that you can just do the spin out on the side and no, we're not going to spend any time. But realistically, you are. And so as a general rule, I would be super skeptical about a spin out when you're a really small startup and even when you're a mid-sized startup. But a pivot, you should always have your eyes open to like, what's the signal I have on my current thing I'm doing? Like, how well is that doing versus another thing that might be going better on the side? You should always be aware of that. But like you say, serial pivots is not a good look. And
serial consistent pivots.
Success. Yeah, that's rarely successful.
Yeah. Okay, now let's turn it around a little bit, Theis. So let's say that we've been good at this, and we're claiming we have been. We killed all those almost as good ideas. But did we ever kill one too many? Was there some idea that we should have maintained or maybe spun out? What do you think about that?
I think the one that I would look at and think like we probably could have done that. I think it would have been interesting to pull out either beer or spirits in a separate one. Like it's so tempting. You could basically take everything we had built from a software perspective. You just kind of pull out, you pull out the data from the database, but you leave everything else in terms of the software in place on the, you have a really great client side app that runs perfectly. You have a server side and all the ingestion tools to get data from all around the world. And now you kind of need to plug in the beer instead of the wine. And we didn't do it because we didn't believe that beer had as good a business model as wine, but could we have set that aside and let someone else run with that? Someone really energetic, someone who would try to make it? I think that's still like for me a tempting one.
And you're missing, I think, one thing here, and that's the actual effort of spinning it out. I think that was one thing that really concerned me is like, oh my God, it's going to be so much work to actually do it too, right?
But I think, and that's why we didn't do it. And I also think if your question is, do you think we should have done it? I still think we made the right choice because I think this is what is underestimated when you do spin outs, that for a small company, it's very, very tough to do a spin out because it's pretend. You think that you can just kind of put it aside and let
And
some
how much time are you
different
going to
team
spend
run
on it
with
after?
Yeah, and you say, no, I'm not going to spend anything. I'm just going to check in once in a while. You know what? You're going to be all over that baby because it's new, it's exciting, and you can't help yourself. So I think we did the right thing, but I do think that's the one where like, oh, actually, you could have put a company into the lake that would have been 10 steps ahead because of all the IP that we could have given it. But we decided not to do it. I think it was the right choice still.
And we're going to get an insight of all of that in just a second because we're fortunate to have Ola Sars on. He is the founder of Soundtrack Technology, a company that was spun out of Spotify to tackle music streaming for the business side. He'll share some real-world insights on why Soundtrack Technologies became its own company and what founders need to consider before spinning out. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break. And we are back. Our guest today is Ola Sars, founder of Soundtrack Technology, a music streaming service for businesses that was spun out from Spotify. Welcome, Ola.
Thank you, Heini. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you again. I think you and I met at a conference somewhere in the South. Is that right?
Yes, I think we were both part of the Boulderton group, right? And
Exactly.
some Boulderton event.
Yeah. A lot of playing poker and drinking. That does happen at these conferences. And I think we maybe might have flown together back home or something like that.
That's correct.
Let's dig in a little bit here. So Soundtrack Technologies is a spin out from Spotify. Why did you start doing that, and how did that all come about?
Well, it was kind of a little bit the other way around. I founded the company, first of all, as an independent company. I came from the consumer streaming space as well, where I was one of the co-founders of Beats Music in the US, and we got acquired by Apple and became Apple Music, and the rest is history. And I moved back to Sweden, where I'm from, Stockholm, Sweden, raised and born, with a very simple idea, which was based on what happened in the consumer markets for streaming will happen in the B2B markets, meaning at your Joe and the Juice or at your local restaurant, there's always music playing, referred to as background music. But basically that industry had not been digitized as the consumer industry, and I had a crazy idea of digitizing the global background music market. It's an incremental opportunity for the music industry as such that nobody had touched. Very boring, kind of the part of the music industry that God forgot about, but that looked good to me. It was a huge market. So I went to Daniel and Martin at Spotify, my good friends from the city here, and said that I'm going to do this, and then we decided to do it together. So we kind of joined forces after I presented the idea to them, and they invested in my idea and my company. And then it was a joint venture together with them, and the initial products were launched together, and they were called Spotify Business and then Spotify Enterprise. So we were perceived as a part of the Spotify brand and family. We did operate as a part of it, but my ambition was always to go independent and create a separate kind of independent brand within this space.
Okay, so you sort of built this together. I did look at a few of these spin-outs when I did the research for this. Actually, it turns out that VMware, the big virtual hosting company, they were actually acquired by EMZ and then spun out again. So it's like an in and out. You're almost like a little bit of an in and out, right?
Yeah, and there's several examples. We also have a company called SoundSuite, which also got acquired by Spotify and then spun out afterwards. So there is a kind of in and out tendency in this market, yes.
So when you went to Daniel with this idea, hey, look, we should do this together, spin out or whatever we call it, was it on their radar already, or what was their thinking behind it?
Yes, it was on their radar. So, and obviously I was on their radar even more so, being part of the founding team of their biggest competitor at the time, Beats Music. So there was a general interest outside a personal relationship to talk business and opportunities in the industry. And when I was moving back home, I had a very tangible idea to them. I think there is an incremental opportunity in the music streaming space. I think we should do it together. There were also synergies, clearly, that I needed a music backend service, which is a massive kind of that runs the hundreds of millions of files and reports and updates kind of the media library of music streaming. So not a trivial component. And then I also had the idea of using kind of internal resources at Spotify to get going with the first product. And it all led to the fact that it became kind of a part of Spotify initially because the brand was Spotify Business, right? One could say that I used the Spotify platform in order to kind of reach a signal and to see if there was a market out there for music streaming for business. And that went quite quickly with Spotify as my partner, obviously, because we very quickly became the leader in the Swedish market and then in the Finnish market and the Norwegian market. And then the signal was so strong that I took the discussion of, okay, Daniel, Martin, it's time for me to move on. It's time for me to move away from home. So it was kind of perceived as a spin out. The investors involved on both sides pretty much saw it as a very natural progression of us integrating into Spotify. But both me and Daniel were in agreement that this company would do much better as an independent kind of entrepreneurial driven unit. Because it's completely different in terms of market and product and basically everything.
Maybe you could say that, and this might be typical for spin-outs too, that while you're still inside the mothership, you do maybe some basic market validation. You have the Spotify hat on, and you go out and sell. Was that technology is one thing? We can get to that. But as a market validation, was that a thing for you guys?
That was the thing, I would say. So very much so. It was much easier to validate the concept of music streaming for business with the Spotify hat on, obviously, because you could leverage the brand equity and general kind of the network that came with that. So it was very effective collaboration, I would say. Spotify got obviously reimbursed by ownership on the cap table, so which they still are. So that was kind of their upside from it. But we'll talk more about why it wasn't kind of the timing from both sides to actually integrate at that time.
Okay, I'm going to come up with a weird question now. Just is your competition this weird music that sounds like something you know but isn't? Is that your competition with no license or little license? You know what I'm talking about? What's that called?
No, it's not. And it's not a weird question because everyone asks me, "Are you? Oh, you're like Epidemic Sound," which is what you're referring to. Which is it's something called royalty-free music, which is kind of a new class of music that's coming to the market, used by TikTokers and so forth. That is owned by one owner, 360, so you can do whatever you want with it. No, it's not. I have the same catalog as Spotify, but it's licensed for business use. So I had to redo this exercise that I've done before in my life. And I thought I actually was going nuts when I realized I had to go out and do these licensing deals again with record labels and publishers, 13,000 of them. 3 years later and, a couple of hundred flights, here we are. But it's a different license, like Hollywood. They license for commercial use in your streaming service, and then there's a separate license for the cinema, right, which costs a whole lot of more money because it's being monetized differently.
Okay, very cool. Okay, let's take it. Theis, any comments now?
No, I was thinking, Ola. So obviously you were in a very special situation given your past in Beats, and like you had a lot of credibility, and also probably already connections with Spotify, or at least you were on their radar. So you kind of had a special position. But if you think about it in general as a startup founder, if you're in an industry where you are operating in the same space as this big player, and you can potentially look at them as a competitor, but you can also see that actually you're not currently a competitor, and it's kind of unlikely that they will actually move into this vertical. Do you see it as a general approach that a startup founder could think of to actually approach this big player and see if there's an opportunity to, in your case, piggyback on, brand and kind of cachet in the industry? Or is it too risky? Like, what if they steamroll me? Or like, how do you look at that?
I don't know if I would recommend it to anyone because it was a very good experiment quickly, but it also cost a lot of money and time to pivot out of once I was there. So I'll try to answer it in a structured way. Yes, there's an interesting way of kind of joining forces with a powerful established brand to quicker get a foothold or kind of traction in the market if there are assets to be shared. And in this case, one example was a music backend, which is, a significant component in the product build. And then there was a brand also that we could use because we were kind of running it through their pipelines initially. So there was clear synergies. Having said that, it requires that the industrial partner, if you may, has a very entrepreneurial mindset, which Daniel and Martin obviously has, and they were kind of happy to run parallel innovation because they knew, because they're extremely disciplined entrepreneurs, that this is not relevant for them. It's too small. It's a different product build. It's a different go-to-market. It's different licensing. It's a distraction from their core focus of competing with the world's biggest tech companies in the consumer market stream, being Apple, Google, Amazon. So that's only a true entrepreneur that can make that call, say, we're never going to spend 1 minute on this. Like, that's just the reality. A more kind of less entrepreneurial organization would easily get carried away with some internal department. Like, I want to do this. Like, we should do this. This is natural for us to do. But Daniel was smart enough to understand without laser focus on one type of customer and one product build, you would never be successful. It would always be the cousin from the countryside inside of Spotify. So it was very natural for him to let it go.
And you knew that already?
I didn't. Of course I didn't. Of course it was risky, but it was worth the risk, because it gave me a catapult to market validation. And also, it's not the worst partner in the world. They were really good and very helpful, and obviously attracted capital very quickly. But that capital, by the way, came at a cost, because that capital more or less was expecting us to integrate. So they kind of expected it being a backdoor to the cap table of Spotify, which I didn't want to do, and that's another story.
So when I look at what needs to be in place for a company, a startup, to do a spin out, one of the final things on my list was actually, it has to be something that the mothership does not want to do. And you just touched on that. What else is there? I mean, you need some kind of team. In this case, you sort of brought the team. That was you. Did you get people from them too, or what happened there?
No. So when the Beats music team integrated into Apple, it was actually founded in Stockholm. Also, we had a tech team here initially. So the people that couldn't move to the US, they became kind of the initial cohort of soundtrackers, and they were all super experienced, mainly engineering people within music streaming, building music streaming services. So it was a very good, strong initial cohort. So we came, and we also spent time before integrating with Spotify, when I founded the company, funding it myself, on kind of ideation and conceptual development of this product, doing market research around what it looks like, and realized it's a completely different product. It's a centralized SaaS platform, basically, for brands, where they can control very complex environments with delivering the right music to the right place at the right time. So it's a very clear B2B product in comparison to kind of decentralized consumer streaming service. So I brought a team. I brought an initial actual product concept, and actually an MVP product as well. So very basic, by the way, not functional, because it did kind of missed the small component of a music backend. But it did show the Spotify team that this is a very different animal. So that obviously helped Daniel and Martin to quickly make a decision to kind of just do this.
I mean, the next thing I have on the list here is quite interesting, because it has to be an opportunity that's big enough. And we touched on that already, but there's also another thing. It can't be too big, right? If this is obvious that this could be a part of Spotify at some point, then you don't want to let go. Thoughts on that?
100% correct. I mean, once again, I didn't know exactly. I had a thesis that this would never be big enough, interesting enough at this point to become a distraction for the Spotify team, who were extremely focused. I mean, it's not like they were not presented with a billion different ideas from business people every week on, expansions of their business or whatnot. What really made them was the discipline of executing on one idea. So I knew that, I knew them well, and my hunch was that that would be the case. Having said that, in the future, it could potentially become a very interesting incremental opportunity for the industry. We're always in close dialogue on kind of what this could be. It could potentially be a growth driver for consumer service as well. I mean, you can walk into a restaurant and kind of like the playlist and then want to have it on your consumer account. There could be a synergy effect down the line, but they are smart enough to let us run just as focused on solving one problem as they were. And they're only halfway through their ambitions so far.
And from a funding point of view, I guess in some spinouts, the mother, the parent would get funding, but I guess the idea with the spinout is also that it becomes independent. One way to become independent is, hey, you bring some other investors on board too. What did you guys do?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, just like without, doing a spinout or this complicated way that I chose to go to market by kind of integrating with an industrial partner. In the normal use case, you have your different sequencing and funding, right? In this case, I also kind of created my own sequencing. One was funding the Spotify business experiment, obviously by myself, Spotify, and the initial principal investors of Spotify. Then came the second part, which was more difficult, funding the pivot away from Spotify. I needed to find other investors that believed I was crazy enough to do it and pull it off. So those they kind of required a bit more risk willingness, so to speak, to fund that pivot. And I was able to find funders of the pivot that could understand the signal and the opportunity of creating an independent company. And then when I was, through that, I needed to kind of fund the next stage of growth for the company. By the way, I also had to fund the COVID crisis, I was on the wrong side of the fence of that one, as you can understand. I mean, my whole market shut down.
So we've had episode here, we've talked about platform risk. If I was an investor, I would say, well, I think you have a little bit of platform risk.
Yeah, no, I had platform risk. It took me, $100 million in fundraising to pivot away from platform risk and create 100% vertical independence. So now, Soundtrack only consumes the same platform risk as any other platform. We own our own licensing deals. We own our own infrastructure to run it. We own our whole product stack and the revenue and the customers that come behind the revenue.
What happens here is that you use the stack from Spotify to get going, and then you replace the entire thing, basically.
I used the back-end stack of Spotify and I built the front-end stack. So the customer interfacing a SaaS layer, and then I used the back-end service, and then we built down independent.
I'm curious about the licenses. I don't know if this is going too much into the weeds, but I was surprised when you said that actually Spotify didn't have the licenses for the business use, and you had to go out and get those. I actually thought that would have been one of the advantages of like going to Spotify because they already had the licenses, but they didn't. Was that an advantage or disadvantage in the sense that do you think that the rights holders have an easier time doing a license negotiation with you? Like, would they have been worried about giving more of their licenses to Spotify and kind of putting all the eggs in one basket on this streaming side for them?
Yeah, very good question as well. It was clearly a disadvantage in this case because they don't want to mix up the kind of commercial relationship with their biggest distributor in the world. Neither does Spotify want to mix up anything. So initially, we just had the test license green card that we worked on together. So when I was able to prove to the rights holders that there is an incremental business here on a global scale that could be meaningful in terms of volume. I mean, it's a $40 billion addressable market opportunity, so it's not small. 95% of US businesses, customer interfacing businesses, actually play music in the background. So all I'm merely doing is digitizing that and moving that revenue onto the digital value chain. So it was a disadvantage engaging with any connection to Spotify. That was also a core driver why we had to move away from home so quickly, kind of pivot away from Spotify, because also the licensing structure is different. The unit economics are different. I had to kind of architect the unit economics for background music in the digital world. And I didn't want to get disturbed by the model that was in place for the consumer services.
Makes a lot of sense.
Not trivial. to push through, which it never is. But this one was, you wonder if you're kind of suicidal almost when you set out to do something like this.
Yeah, and in your case for the second time, right? But then on the other hand, this is now one of your moats, right? You've all those flights and the years that you've spent on creating all these licenses. That is now a huge moat for you in your business.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's not just like you need to know people, and it's a very kind of a dysfunctional industry in that way as well. It's not like you can pop up to Sony in New York and ask for a global license.
Yeah. If we look back now and say, okay, you did it this way, you did it like a spin in and spin out again. Could you have done this without Spotify? And how would you have done that? And yeah, maybe was this the right way to go or what?
Yeah, I mean, that's really, it's in the past, but have I dwelled upon it? Yeah, I have a billion times. What did it cost me? What was it worth it? I would lie to say if I knew, if I had to do it again, what I would choose, to be honest, because I've never really came to the conclusion. I probably would have gone with the partnership because it's such a powerful partnership. It made so much sense. It made sense from a product and market and kind of usage perspective, but it made no sense from a financial investing perspective. So, but people tend to, forget about the boring stuff when they're excited about the opportunity. So, but did it cost me a significant chunk on the cap table? Yes. Did it create 3 years of pivotal pains? Yes. But would I have been able to fund the build out of a streaming service, which, by the way, there's a reason why there's not a bunch of streaming services everywhere. It's really damn expensive to build, and it's very complex, the kind of the engine of it. Maybe not. Probably not, because the addressable opportunity of the B2B market isn't as vast as the consumer market. Hence, the risk willingness to upfront or front load the investment wouldn't be as intriguing. So the risk profile is different. Too much capital required for too small of a business case, I would say.
This was my next question, really, is this might have been, you might have had a lot of pain doing this, but all else equal, probably lower risk, right?
Yes, most likely, because I got off, I had product, market traction, a company, the world leading company who vouched for me, who let me in to use their brand. And that's a pretty good vouching. And obviously access to some capital. And I had proof of concept in the Nordic markets, in 3 or 4 of the Nordic markets, or 3 or 5 of the Nordic markets. So that was a very good pitch, but the pitch wasn't easy to pitch a pivot.
One thing I kind of think, you're obviously, Spotify is a huge company now, and you're a smaller company. I mean, this could have lived inside Spotify now and been whatever. How do you see the advantages of being smaller and more nimble now? How do you see that?
Well, the obvious, right? Like the ability to focus on the business to business market. Just within that, you have to kind of slice and dice to become focused. I mean, it's about choosing a market, choosing a business vertical, and win that battle first, right? So it really is all about allowing for laser focus on solving one mission first. And within a big company, we would have never really had, like, we would have been 99 on the list every time of initiatives, right, that would get resources. We would have, died a slow death inside. And that's not their fault. That has nothing to do with the company or anything like that. It's just the fact of it's cutthroat what projects get funding and priority. And that's how a functioning company works. If it doesn't, it's a dysfunctional company.
I mean, this is always what we preach, right? Look, focus like crazy on one audience. And how did Spotify become such a big player? I mean, it's incredibly impressive with the competition you have there, right? That's been incredible discipline, right?
Yeah, and I think they don't get enough credit for it, but people take it for granted. Remember, they're from up here in the north where nobody is, and there's hardly, I'm talking about the whole region. And again, once again, US European startups versus US startups. I mean, the access to capital is just a joke in comparison to over there, and the access to competence or go to market is just a joke. So, like, there's people should really realize they beat the big giants, and they beat them by being a verticalized, laser focused company and not getting distracted by business people who are not disciplined. And usually that is like corporate people who get, who aren't disciplined, that come in from big companies and think that they can build like vertical expansions and stuff, and they screw shit up. And true entrepreneurialism is being able to stay at that discipline, even though other opportunities are provided.
I mean, this is just an example of a company, a product that we would have expected Silicon Valley to win. And this is one of the rare occasions where that was not the case, which is, again, incredibly impressive. Theis, what else did we miss here?
No, yeah, I would add to that there was also that factor of it actually took them a long time to even launch in the US, right? So in the US, because again, back to the licenses, so in the US they had every opportunity to have the Spotify over there, whatever their own would be, and then win the European market, but it didn't play out that way. And I think it's just down to that really sharp focus that they had of just like they wanted to do this and just this.
Yeah, and then one more thing that I need to kind of like now sitting here on this side of the world and following the debate in between the US and the EU and like the innovation here versus the innovation over there is like they also did understand, so they had kind of an American angle to it. It's like if you raise more money than anyone else, then you're ahead. And that was also a winning concept that they borrowed from our friends in the West, right? Like you need to raise a bunch of money if you're going to have a chance. And hence they did. And they took a lot of risk and it paid off.
In these kind of spaces, it's an arms race, right? You really have to go for it. If you hesitate a little bit, you'll lose. Simple as that.
Yeah, and same for me in my little vertical. I've raised 10 times more than anyone else in my. I mean, nobody's out there raising money in the background music space. I'll tell you that much. But I did, and
it's fucking sexy though.
Yeah, and now look, I have a product that's 5 years ahead of anyone else, and building what we built, it's not trivial. So I'm not saying that we're anywhere yet, but we did establish the first beachhead, which is product technology leadership and a deep moat. And from there we can build. And that you needed to raise $100 million to get there. I knew that.
Okay, thanks for breaking it down for us, Ola. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we're going to have some final thoughts on this and a couple of other things. We'll be back in a sec. Okay, we are back. So after hearing what you've said, it's clear that spin-outs are a big decision and a lot of things need to line up for them to be relevant. But Ola, if you look back now, what are the key takeaways? What did you really learn? I know you've had some learnings that have been really painful. What are they? What can we learn from this?
I mean, my key learnings is the evidence stuff. Like, is there is a lot of discipline required to stay focused. And that's even more so through my career and my failures and my successes. Here was really kind of the pivotal moment for me to say 100% focused on one idea, because I was obviously offered to sell the company, and the offer was, it was bigger down the line as well, and it could have gone in any direction. But so here, it's a little bit cliche, entrepreneur cliche, but what I really learned, if you see this massive market opportunity, you believed in it both intellectually and emotionally for a while, stick to that. Get up in the morning, 7 days a week, and execute on that one plan. And always ask yourself, did I spend 95% of my working hours on that plan, or was I distracted today? So it's back to kind of like relentless focus if you have signal on the idea. Otherwise, let's do another podcast about pivots and whatnot. But if you get signal, be ruthless in your focus.
No, exactly. And I think pivots is one thing that we didn't talk about. But if we bring this back to, let's say, the founders were with early stage companies, right? Where you're not necessarily looking at like a spin out is not really definitely not what you should do. You should focus on your thing. But I think the alternative to the spin out for the early stage founder that they need to keep in mind always is the pivot, right? That maybe you see signal somewhere else, somewhere you didn't think there was signal. And you need to keep an eye on that, because maybe you are building in the wrong direction. Maybe there's something quite different or adjacent to what you're doing, where actually that's where the signal is, and that's where you should pivot to. So it's not a spin out, but it's a pivot. And I think for early stage founders, that's something that you should really be aware of.
And I think I just want to say, I want to be clear about, yes, I totally agree, because I said that in the context of having a signal and stronger signal every day I went to work, because I was always sniffing for it. Is it there still? Because I totally agree, like emotionally connected to a business idea, anyone can do it. I've done it before in my life. I've done mistakes in that. Then you have to be able to pivot early. But if you keep getting the signal, you need to get more as focused as strong as the signal is.
Yeah, and we always have doubt. Is this the right thing? Is it going to work? And so, but you've been at it for a few years now, so you must have seen it. And I guess signaling this is just revenue. They keep buying. Did you have problem with churn or something? Since it feels like you had problems or just doubts. What I say?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, the cycle for B2B startup is always first you have to reach product market fit, and product market fit is when you see customers buying and staying, and you look at the kind of expansion of the cohorts over time, if they're growing or not, the net revenue retention, which is referred to in B2B SaaS. That's really like, we had a very clear definition of product market fit, and it took us a long while, 3-4 years to get there. Because the users aren't, on their way home from work, from, working in a bar or something, they're using Spotify or Apple. They have the same expectations of catalog and swiftness and software quality, right? So we needed to be better. We needed to be the business upgrade. We needed to be business class on top of that. So that was obviously not a trivial task. And then the second stage of B2B SaaS building is go-to-market fit. And that's where we are right now, which is trying to really find a scalable go-to-market motion that you can kind of keep investing in to move from kind of linear growth to exponential growth.
And when you say that in the early days, when you had doubt about the product market fit, was that the product, or people just said, look, maybe this isn't good enough, I'm just going to use nothing, or where do they go?
It was the product, first of all, because I'm not going to run the whole story. We had different iterations of the product to get where we are now, where we have two options. You can go with kind of more of a radio-like product. You can go for an on-demand product where you're basically kind of choosing your own soundscape wherever you are in the world. And both of those products, in combination with the free trial and kind of the right motions during that, in order to get them onboarded correctly, so that they did, get to the aha moment, or time to value was short enough for them to stay and pay. So, I mean, that's a huge exercise, and there's a long story about that. But did we have doubt? No, because I had the luxury of coming from being in the consumer markets and knowing that people want streaming. And if people want streaming, that's the new industry standard. They most likely want streaming at work as well, because it's a real-time technology. It gives you all the benefits of being contextually relevant and so forth, selling more coffee at the end of the day. So I had this like intellectual conviction that what happened in the consumer space will happen in the B2B space. That on the flip side of that was also my biggest challenge, because 3/4 of the market were misusing consumer services in a business context, using opening cinemas on their Netflix account, to use the same analogy as before, which obviously doesn't benefit the big rights holders, nor does it benefit the market in general. So I had that also, knowing that sooner or later the market will harmonize. Universal Music, Sony Music, Warner Music will see to it that happens, because they're leaving money on the table. So I needed those two kind of intellectual convictions in order to pursue.
Cool. Any final questions, Theis?
No, it's fascinating to listen to you, Ola. It's so clear, a person who's worked in this space for so long, and just you have a very clear analysis and understanding of like some fundamentals in the market that just puts you in a really cool position to take advantage of it business wise. So I think it's so cool that you've now done it again in this way. So that's super impressive.
Cool. So before we end it here, we want to ask the question we do every week, and what are you obsessed with this week? So Theis, do you want to start? What are you obsessed with right now?
I'll start this week. I'll do a quick shout out to another podcast. Sorry, Heine, for driving traffic away from you. No, but it's a bit on this topic as well. So there's a podcast called Acquired, which I don't know if you know, but it's these two guys that do amazing episodes on they have a tech history approach where they look at companies and do very long episodes where they go through the history of a company and try to analyze and explain why did it succeed or fail, and it's super fascinating. This week they have a sister podcast to that called ACQ2, where they do these shorter episodes where they interview someone. And this week I was listening to, they have an interview with one of the founders from Hugging Face. As you know, Heine, I'm a bit into, obviously we're into AI and what's happening there, but especially like open source AI and how is that going to play out. And it's just a very fascinating interview with the founder, one of the founders of Hugging Face. They're French, but he's a super, super smart guy. And one of the fascinating things about Hugging Face is today it's a platform, right, where developers can share their AI models and data sets. But actually, that's a pivot from, they started out as an AI chatbot. They wanted to create an AI chatbot, and they realized that in order to do an AI chatbot a few years ago, they had to do multiple different AI models on top of each other, kind of like layered and stacked. And so they had this kind of constant challenge of like, which model should we pick for this problem? Which model is best at picking up sentiment versus which model is best at language processing? And so they had all these models, and they actually realized that they were actually kind of good at kind of evaluating and making these models available and so on. And they just saw a ton of developers having kind of the same issues. So they pivoted from this AI chatbot into now being a massive platform and kind of the go-to place for any developer who wants to get their hands on the latest models and data sets and work with them. So it's a fascinating interview. He's a really, really smart guy. I'm very impressed. And it's a good story to listen to. So a shout out to the Acquired podcast from me.
Acquired 2 is this the sister podcast?
Yes, exactly. Acquired 2.
Fantastic. Ola, what do you say?
I'm a simple man. I'm trying to steer this ship at Soundtrack, which is fortunately my hobby as well. So very much focused on my own kind of domain. I do this week. We've had internal sessions, which has kind of got me completely focused on really kind of hyper segmentation. So nothing new, but hyper segmentation is just what it sounds like. It's like in a world where you can slice and dice your kind of marketing or go-to-market motions down to like hyper small segments, and you can scale that because every buying pattern is a little bit different. Every problem solving is a little bit different. As an example, maybe French restaurants in Philadelphia have a specific problem that you could actually go after, and you can package a marketing campaign, multi-channel campaign, and you can configure product onboarding based on that micro segment. And obviously in B2B, it becomes even more relevant because the cohorts, if you could also understand your current customer base on what cohorts have a tendency to evolve, over time, and, provide, the biggest LTV development, you can actually kind of find those micro segmentations effort paying off quite nicely. So nothing new under the sun, but taking Soundtrack into kind of becoming as a sophisticated company in our go-to-market motions as we are as a product building team.
Amazing. Okay. How many segments do you have then?
We don't know. That's the problem. So here's the CEO coming in, thinking he can, steer the team in the right direction. Yeah. And obviously, I'm clueless at the end of the day on the real details. And because I'm not in it every day, which is a good thing, it opens up a very healthy internal debate between growth, revenue, and product. And that's where we are right now. And it's quickly becoming very intriguing where it can lead to. How can we learn from our customer? I mean, we have 35,000 business to business customers. That's a base that no one else has. And we have every move that they make. That's a huge competitive leadership if we can use that data in order to kind of segment the market and go after new customers. So a very healthy exercise in a startup in early days in our commercialization.
Amazing. Okay, I'm going to jump a little bit. I'm going to stay on the business side here because last week I was in Singapore and Vivino opened the first ever Vivino flagship store. And I mean, for me, that has been an incredible experience. And I, Theis, you followed it closely too. We're still solving the same problem, is that you walk into somewhere and want to buy a bottle of wine, you don't know what to buy. And we've sort of built that into a shop in Singapore. And the people we built it with has been like incredibly on brand. It like feels like walking into an Apple store. It's much cleaner, much lighter. You get to make your own decision. There's data everywhere. And obviously the wines that are in there are like handpicked by the community. Everything's good at each price point. So that's been an incredible thing to see how much attention we got on that. And also that the shop is doing really well. So super excited. Not a pivot, not a spin out, but quite interesting.
We should work together on that, Heini, because that experience should also augment into hyper-contextual music experience.
That's 100% right. We need to get that in there for sure. I'm not even sure there is any music in there. We need to use all our senses, like taste and music, ears and all that, right?
And if it really is like an Apple store, Heine, there should be a Genius bar serving wine.
There is, but it's an app. I mean, it's just it's an iPad.
Okay.
Not as genius-y.
One interesting that we're seeing is a translation in between different types of kind of product experiences. Meaning, example, you could tell them, if you like these tracks right now, you should drink this wine, or if you drink this wine, you should have this playlist. We actually experiment with that.
Oh wow! I mean, we have these big screens on the wall. That could be something, right? When you do a tasting, you do matching music.
Yeah, there's like wine music tasting that our curators here kind of. They're also, one of them is a huge sommelier here in Sweden, so he does music and wine tasting.
Wow, that could be something for the shop.
Multisensory.
Okay. Fantastic. We've come to the end of another episode of Founders Weekly. Thank you, Ola. This was really fascinating. Thank you very much, Theis, too. Please make sure you follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a review and rating. It really helps. For those of you on YouTube, make sure you check out Raw Startup. A lot of videos about how to build a startup. This has been Founders Weekly. Now stop listening and go build something.